started. The primary task for today is to discuss the new story world builder, the Encounter story world builder. And so I would like to, I sent it out yesterday, and that didn't give you much time. Has everybody had a chance to at least launch the program and look at it and use it just a little?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay. Let me just see, how many people have not had the opportunity to look at it yet? Neil. Let's see, whom else? Okay. Well, this is the first real draft of the general purpose Encounter editor story world builder thing. And the question is whether it looks promising enough to provide the basis for some future work. And so I'm putting that question to you. Those of you who have looked at it, what do you think? Is this something, does this look promising to you?
I thought it just seemed like easier than the last version.
Yeah.
You could just click the plus, you could create an encounter. The testing thing was a lot more intuitive. I thought those were two big improvements.
Yeah, believe it or not, I did all of that coding in about 48 hours. I'm surprised. I thought I had grown senile and was unable to write code, but apparently at least now I'm capable of doing it. I'm sure I'll lose it again. Let's see. I'll give you an example of aging. Last night, I watched the Perseid meteor shower because it peaked last night. And I have watched the Perseid meteor shower every year since 1965. That's 55 years. And I've watched it every single night, largely because I live on the West Coast and it's clear in August. However, in 20 minutes of watching, I saw only one Perseid. Most people would see at least 20 or 30. That's because I'm old and my eyes have degraded. So fortunately, my mind has not degraded as badly as my eyes have. So anyway, so the program is operational, easy to use, but do you think you could build interesting story worlds with it? What's your hunch based on what you've seen right now?
Yeah, I took a quick second to open it up and see what's been added. And I think that, well, for me, I don't know pretty much anything about what happens in the XML file or how that works. So I understand that you can change the character settings in the editor, but adding new characters can't be done there. And I think that if we get bigger and bigger story worlds, I think it'll just be easier to, if possible, put that in there and have a way of organizing events in a UI sense.
Actually, one fundamental change I made with this was to eliminate all array lists. That is, there is nothing that is expandable. Basically, with every encounter, you get 5 options. No more, no less. Now, an option can be unused, but that's how many you get. For each option, you get 4 reactions. No more, no less. And you get 7 characters. No more, no less. So when you bring up the character editor, you see all 7 characters, but 5 of them are called nobody. And the program simply skips over anybody named nobody. And if you want them to be active, you give them any name other than nobody. In fact, I will, let me ask you a simple design question here that has bothered me. When I have null, there are 3 places where there's something that exists that is not active. Reactions, options, and characters. If there's no working character, we call it nobody. If there's no working reaction, it says unused reaction. If there's no working option, it's supposed to say unused option, but I don't see that right now. The question is, should I explicitly say this is a slot that could hold something, but it is unused? In fact, I could have the character called unused character. Or should I leave it blank? Which better communicates the idea that here's an empty slot that you can use? To explicitly say, this is an empty slot, or do we just have it empty?
Usually in UI design, or like generally when you write something and you have a place that is like temporary or to be filled out later, you write something, but you write it in square brackets.
Oh, that's the protocol nowadays, huh? Okay.
At least from what I've seen.
Okay.
So it like signifies that there you have like a text that says like a tooltip, for example, the nobody or unused or blank name or whatever, but you give it the signifier of being a bit different with the square brackets.
Okay, so just use the square brackets to indicate that the slot is available but unused. Okay. Any other thoughts, ideas on that?
I have a question.
Sure.
What is the logic for how the encounters flow together? I ask because it's not clear in the UI, and after digging through the code, I'm not able to tell.
Yep. Here's the interesting thing about this. The encounter system, the most profound difference between the encounter system and the conventional text adventure, interactive fiction, so forth, choose your own adventure and so forth. Those are all basically branching trees, and the decisions you make determine which leaf on the tree you go to, or which node in the tree you go to. And so basically it's a switching network. An encounter story world is not a switching network. You do not switch from, maybe I'll end up here, maybe I'll end up there. The variability, the effect of the player's actions is to change global variables. In the simplest possible encounter story world, you simply experience every single encounter in sequence. They're just set up in a sequence 1 through 100, and you go through them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And as you make decisions, though, you are changing relationships. You're changing the people's attitudes towards you. And that, in the end, is what will determine the outcome of the story. So that's what I've learned with Le Mort d'Arthur, the trick is to simply get people to respect you as a leader. And so this is profoundly different and actually quite odd, I think. But I'll point out, I think it's a very good thing that the entire emphasis is on relationships. This is exclusively about social intelligence. How will people feel if I do this? How will they feel if I do that? Now, you can have there is a certain amount of branching permitted in the system, but the branching is tacked on rather than fundamental. The fundamental system at work is the change in personality, in relationships, actually attitudes towards you, p-values towards you. You can influence the flow of encounters in three ways. One, with the prerequisites. You can ensure that let me talk about the engine here. What the engine does is it has a database of encounters. Each encounter has an earliest turn and a latest turn. And so the engine starts off and it runs through all of the encounters, eliminating those that are not in the proper, whose time window is not now. So it's got a clock. It says it's turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. And so at turn 21, it goes through looking for only encounters whose time window includes turn 21. Now you could rig it so that it's all of them. In fact, I'm going to rig the default so that the latest turn is like turn 100, so that essentially every encounter defaults to, I can be experienced at any point in the entire story. So I have a very broad time window. You can set things up so you have narrow time windows at some point during the evolution of the story. So the engine first picks out the encounters that are accessible at that point. Next, it goes through the history of what has already taken place, and it eliminates some candidate encounters based on the history. One, some of them will have prerequisites. You can't ride the horse if you haven't already gotten a horse. So if there's an encounter where you get the horse and a later encounter where you ride the horse, you can make getting the horse a prerequisite to riding the horse. If that hasn't happened, then this is eliminated, not considered. In the same way, there are disqualifying encounters. For example, let's say there's an encounter where the horse runs away. That encounter would disqualify the ride the horse encounter. So there are things that can block or that can somehow prevent an encounter from taking place. And then finally, the strongest of these is the consequence thing. Little tiny box up in the top of the third. It's not active now. Oh, of course, it can't be active. The consequence box, it brings up all other encounters. And so you can declare, if this encounter takes place, then it is necessarily followed by this encounter. And so you can set up direct linkages like that. Now, I have not yet put in consequences per options, and I think I'm going to have to. I have been very reluctant to do that because that gets us right back into that goddamn old tree structure. but at the same, you know, and now everybody's thinking that, oh, this is just another text adventure generator. And they turn away from the important element, which is how people feel about you. Nevertheless, I think I'm going to have to attach consequences to options. For example, in this little sample, the protagonist has four options, and those options could trigger consequences. That is, if he ignores Black Bart, that could antagonize Black Bart. I'm really reluctant to do this because this gets us into inclinations and all of the complexities of the full Storytron technology, and I am very worried about that. Let me hear some opinions on whether we should have branching capabilities.
I like the linking options. Like in Twine, when I've played with that node-based structure, being able to see where the options were going, like with the graphical kind of nodes on them.
Yeah.
I thought make the stories really fast. Like the creation process was incredibly fast on that program.
Yeah.
And some of that is because the real option is just like, oh, there's a text block, you click an option, and then it takes you to the next little package, which is just a text block and the options.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, see.
It's the branching. It's the same problem that you're trying to get around. But
yeah.
Like running away, when I was thinking about your scenario of like the ignore him or the run away from Black Bart scenario, it's like the consequence to just be like, okay, now you're outside, you know, would be really easy to do with a branching option, where maybe it would be like turning the turn, like now we're at turn 35 and turns 1 through 34 are all inside the bar.
Yeah.
Maybe another way to get a similar sort of deal.
Did Storytron have a different system?
Storytron definitely had a network system. It wasn't a tree, though. It was a directed graph. The difference being that a tree, the general flow is from the top downward. And down at the bottom are things like, you live happily ever after, you die a miserable, lonely death, whatever. In the Storytron system is designed for you to go round and round through all sorts of different interactions and eventually filter your way out to an end one.
If you could figure out a way to visually have a user connect encounters that way, that would be a way to get around the simplicity of the tree structure.
Please expand on that.
So I'm not familiar with the Twine engine, but from what I remember from how it's described, or at least I've used programs that are similar. I've used several programs where object-oriented programs. A good one comes to mind called Max MSP, or something like PD. How it works is they have blocks of information. Unreal does this too. Many engines do this. Well, they'll have blocks, and inside the block is just, and all these blocks will be connected to lines, which are connected to other blocks. And the way you make your code is by collecting inputs and outputs that are blocks, where the inputs are on top of the block, and the output is on the bottom of the block, or some other logic. Or maybe it's on the side, like input is on the left, outputs on the right. And you connect inputs and outputs to different blocks that you make. And the block isn't suggesting that you go down or up, but it's something that you create your own structure. That could be something that's much looser that would than just a simple tree structure. The trick, though, I think, if it could be visual, that would be difficult to more difficult to code, but I think it would be more easier to manage, and people who are introduced to the ideas to sort of get their hands on it in a way that it would be a little bit more intuitive.
You can see the direction of the graph. When it's node-based like that, you can see where it loops back. It's very clear.
Yes. I am reluctant to have that graphical display. Yes, I agree that it is really easy to do, so long as you keep it small. I actually, at one point with the Storytron technology, God, I must have wasted, well, I shouldn't say wasted, expended months and months trying to make that work.
Mm.
The problem is that as my network grew larger, it became impossible to represent the graph. I mean, it just got, either I had to cram more and more stuff with arrows going all over the place, little tiny things, or I had to have some sort of stepped system. I ended up going to a stepped system where you would see one node and all of the branches out from it, and then you could click on one of those branches and click on one of those resultant nodes, and then it would put that in the center. But geez, there just wasn't any way. That kind of thing works very well with small trees.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you get too big, it just, I even had I did a similar display for my simulation game, Balance of the Planet, in which I had all the causal relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
this amount of coal energy generates this much energy, it generates this much sulfur dioxide, this much nitrous dioxide, and then the sulfur dioxide makes acid rain, and the acid rain creates deforestation. So there's this huge network of causal relationships. I was able to make that work because it's a tree, because basically the causality flows downward. There were a few feedbacks, and because there were a few, I could make it work. But even then, the display was so damn big, you had to scroll through it. So that's something I'm very, it doesn't work. Or I should say, it doesn't work with a network that's big enough to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Have you
Right.
considered nesting, or did you try that at all in your experience?
Well, the nesting is what I did with Storytron, where you could see one, and that was
Okay.
too small. And so, I try, is there an intermediate level of nesting? Well, could we show the core one, and then each of the connections it goes to, and then for each of them, the connections they go to? I looked into that, and that ran out of juice really quickly, because some of the connections got very intricate.
What if it was constrained by stage? So it was like you only saw one stage at a time. So when you had just too many interactions in, let's say, the bar, it'd be telling you like, oh, put your character somewhere else.
Well, no, this was, the purpose of this diagram is to show the possible logical connection.
Mm-hmm.
This verb might lead to that verb, which is not constrained by stage. So the stage part wouldn't help us.
I'm just trying to think of a way to like bisect it, to get like this huge story into like a scene, even as like,
yeah,
I don't know,
prune it somehow.
Yeah.
And boy,
you could go the scripting route, where, I mean, this is going a whole different philosophy of how your users interact with the program. but it could be where instead of making a visual system, that they're making small chunks of code and have the chunks of code dictate at the beginning, okay, these are the inputs of what could come from the connections that could come to this world, have the logic of what's inside and all the data in it in some way that's clear, hopefully, and then have outputs, and maybe have each of those be a file, or have them be segregated some way that makes sense, so that in the end, when you're building a large structure, instead of a whole big mess that you're looking at a whole bunch of individual files, maybe. Did you play around with that at all?
No, I did not. But how would you, I mean, you see this block that says file XYZ123.
Yeah, with
How does
scripting,
that help?
it's harder because it's something you have to, the logic of how it all connects together, you have to build yourself. Yeah, there's really not an easy problem to it. And just scripting comes to mind just because that's what I've done personally in larger projects that have had complicated tree-like structures, but structures where like things could loop and logic was very complicated. I would personally end up splitting things into separate files just to keep things organized.
Well, our task here, okay, here we
What
go.
about-
Somebody presented a,
I mean, the core problem like what comes next? Like, given this response, what is the most desirable or the most dramatic next thing to serve our users? Is that the core problem?
Yeah, this is visual coding in a nutshell, this image.
yeah. I was just
And, uh,
looking at the Detroit Become Human image, and
Yeah.
the problem is, sure, it looks impressive, but gee, how do you expand that damn thing? And how do you
Brute
follow
force.
those lines?
It's like a 200 developers rock project, but I think what it means is if it is difficult to represent visually the story world or the story script, maybe it's because it's too complicated or too big for a game. You know, like if the story is maybe simple enough or straightforward, it would be easily represented in an image.
Here's our issue. Imagine, take any given story. Let's take, you know, the Lord of the Rings. Okay, imagine now you can track that out as a simple straight line, but take any given point in that story. Let's see. Here's Frodo decides to go off alone with Samwise, and at that point, think of all the possibilities you could imagine. That is, Frodo could have decided to turn back. You know, maybe this is a stupid idea. I think I'll go back with the others. Maybe he could have been chased by orcs. I mean, you could think at any given point, you can imagine all sorts of alternatives. So you take that long story, which has thousands of events in it, each of which could have branched off in a different direction, and you've got a hairy mess. But that's a real story. Even the classic teeny tiny story. I like to use the spider, itsy bitsy spider, crawls up the gutter spout, down comes the rain, washes the spider out comes the sun, dries up all the rain, itsy bitsy spider climbs up the gutter, the spout again. Well, even that, the simplest possible story, I can put in branching alternatives and make a tree out of that thing. Itsy bitsy spider says, "Oh, fuck this," and he walks away. You know, the rain drowns the spider. The rain doesn't come. The sun doesn't come out. You know, there are a million of these variations just for a teeny tiny story. If you're going to do interactive storytelling, you are going to have a huge network. There's no way around that.
I don't know.
And so,
yeah, like you said in your on your blog, you said that like, for example, we need to make a language, and we can't make a human language with a complex grammar and everything. We have to make a toy language.
yes, yes.
So we have to make a toy story,
Yeah.
like a small story that is defined by, you know, for example, if Frodo stays in the village, there's no story. So he has to choose to continue. So the art form of video games and interactive stories would be to decide what kind of path you can go on.
Yeah.
This way we have a limited amount of branching paths, because it shouldn't be exponential. It should come from the different ends and crawl back to the beginning instead of beginning until infinity of endings.
But Frodo doesn't have an unlimited amount of options in the Shire because he is Frodo. Like, that character has a limited amount of options. That character is only going to do that character will take adventure. Yeah. Like, you don't give the player even the option to do that, because that's not Frodo's character. Frodo wants to go on an adventure.
He's a hero, so he has a fate, and he has to do all the things that makes him a hero in the end.
And we're discovering that Frodo character as we play him. I feel like that's a way to constrain it.
Yes, I can certainly agree that, you know, Frodo is not going to say, you know, I think I'll just stay here in the Shire and get married and have kids.
Mm-hmm.
We can rule out that option. But certainly once he sets out on his adventure, that adventure can unfold in billions of ways. And we've got to at least permit some of those alternatives to arise. And the fundamental question, I suppose one of the things I'm pressing hard on is, I am very suspicious of the idea of the logical tree. You know, Frodo, the classic text adventure interactive fiction tree that, you know, you've got to read the book to put the troll to sleep so you can get past him, you know, that crap. And that's why I am so suspicious, wary of putting in a consequential option. Let me explain.
How about like an alternative solution? Currently, we have prerequisites and disqualifiers, and also every character has a set of P numbers that describe how they feel about other characters. What if we introduce like sort of like an inventory? This could be like numbers, bounded numbers or integers or something like that. And for example, if the character chooses a certain option, or the player chooses a certain option, or is allowed to choose, whatever the case, it can change our internal inventory. For example, it could decrease the number of water we have with us, or we have a horse now. And that would enable or disable or even increase the chance of other encounters.
Oh, now we're getting into probability stuff. So now the tree we're drawing has gray arrows of varying degrees of blackness.
In a way, yes, because it could allow certain encounters to enter or exit the pool of possible options, or the possibilities that would be drawn the next turn.
Do you have to roll on it though? Like if you have this probability space, do you then have to do the random roll to see which space you end up in?
You already have this, like, at least from what I understand how the encounters would work. You have one encounter, and then you roll the next encounter, and it can be different. There is no like set order.
Let me tell you here. Let me give you an idea. Whoops. Come on, Chris. I don't want to do that. There. I want to give you an idea of what I'm driving at here. So I want to show you two images demonstrating something. This first image represents the way portraiture was done in Italy in the mid to late 15th century, 1450 to 1490 or so. Portraits were flat, two-dimensional side profiles. And that's just the way portraits were done. And everybody thought of portraits that way. That's what a portrait was. And then along came the second image, Leonardo da Vinci. This image was revolutionary, lady with an ermine. Because first, he really, really sweated the fine shading of the skin on the lady's face. It's, if you magnify that image, the gradations in shading are very, very well done. Because he really wanted the face to look three-dimensional. Even more important, and this is the part that really made this painting revolutionary, was the fact the lady's posture, that's not a static posture. Nobody sits that way. This lady was obviously looking forward, and somebody said something, and she's turning her face to the side to look at them. The portrait implies motion. It implies life. And this one portrait kicked off a huge revolution. And that's the thing that worries me. Are we doing the flat face? Are we, with text adventures and the logical trees of if you do this, then you'll go down to this node, but if you do that, you go down to that node. Are we doing the same thing that those people were doing with those flat side view faces? And isn't there something that just blows that aside, goes in a completely different direction and advances us? And that's what I'm struggling with. That's what I have been struggling with all my stuff. The Storytron technology actually does that. Unfortunately, it's too complicated. So the question I'm struggling with is, can I shrink it down to the encounter system and still somehow preserve the revolutionary part, which focuses on social intelligence, in which the player's worry is, how will people feel if I do this? Whereas, how will they feel if I do that? That's the whole point I'm driving at. I want the player worrying about the other person's feelings. And logical consequences, you're worrying about the other person's actions. So
Would there be a way to create emotional consequences then?
Yeah, that's the whole idea. That's the lowest in the editor window. The lowest right corner is where you get the emotional consequences, and that really is the most important part.
But that's on a micro level and not on a macro level.
What do you mean by micro versus macro?
Mm-hmm.
Micro as in, this is what happens as a result of one choice that you make.
Yep.
as a player.
Yeah.
But
Well, in
but
most stories, the development consists of a great many small steps. That's
Right.
one thing I'm certain of. In stories, you don't have a point where Darth Vader suddenly says, you know, I've been an asshole. I'm going to be a nice guy. I'm going to get rid of this black costume and wear white stuff, and I'll have a smile on my helmet. And so, no, that doesn't happen. It took a long, long series of interactions with Luke Skywalker before he changed. And it was only when he was dying that he changed.
Mhm.
So it's got to be in small steps.
Okay, so we can possibly restrict the idea that I've proposed only to the P numbers. And
Yeah, like having a
encounters.
prerequisite
Yeah.
as like P, one of those P numbers.
Sorry?
Like having a prerequisite, like this encounter will only trigger if Black Bart likes me or if Black Bart
Bingo.
hates me.
Yeah, exactly.
That may be the answer. The p-values are what open up the...
Because that's what's changing. That's that tree,
Yeah,
you know.
that's what's changing. So,
And we retain the granularity that you mentioned.
so p-values open doors
Or close them.
or close them. Yes,
Mhm.
that might be the solution. I'm going to work on that.
Then it's still back to like, what do you serve next? Like, is like a door that's open, should that be prioritized versus like a door that's always open? You know, how do you order these encounters?
Yep.
You
Yes.
don't.
Is
You
what
don't
it all
have
comes
to,
back
or
to.
you don't have to order them. You can use, for example, weighted probabilities. For example, let's say that it's like a romance story, and you have two characters that are interested in the player. Depending on how you craft the story and how the story progresses, you can, for example, say that this particular encounter, the probability of this particular encounter depends on how much each of the characters are interested in me, in the player.
Yeah.
And then if one character is interested point 0.1 and the other is 0.2, then there is a higher probability of the second character, the encounter for the second character to sorry, to fire, and not the for the first one. If you understand what I'm trying to.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm a little reluctant to get into probability stuff because we'll lose a lot of potential authors on that. Because probabilistic thinking is a lot harder for most people to do.
This could be an option. It doesn't have to be a default one. It could be as simple as, if this character likes me 0.05, then this encounter can be executed.
What if it's like you go to a dinner party and it's like the person who likes you most is the one that talks to you? Like,
it's probably also worth saying that a story that's told with the system is going to lean towards certain types of stories. To me, this structure seems to suggest more of an episodic story. This is an opinion. I don't know if it's true or not. It could be totally wrong, but I get the inclination that a more episodic way of putting the story together, where there are separate events that are connected, sort of in the same way that the Tinker Toy system inserts names and inserts antagonists and protagonists, where in an episodic story we'll have individual events that all connect together in some way. And it could be that the logic of how you see those events or what events are chosen is dictated by emotional logic of some sort.
Well, in fact, I have eliminated that form of variability as well. Now, in the current system, there's no tinker toy text. Everything is explicitly with a particular character. And that's what we call the target character. Wait, is that? No, I'm now, yeah, the antagonist. Each encounter has a specified antagonist. You can't randomly plug in different antagonists. And there is one specified protagonist always, and that is character number 0. So I'm trying to nail things down to reduce variability.
Oh, you took out fate.
Yeah, there's no fate in this because the encounters already provide this. Yeah, it's already very explicit, and so we don't need to step in and make things happen. The encounters are already doing that. So let's see. I'm reading Lorenzo's comment. Oh boy, looks complicated.
Yeah, I'm not sure it could be applied, but I just watched this documentary about the game theory, and it's not for games. It's for like researchers trying to make a complex model of nature or people, and they simplified a lot of the data to be able to make this complicated system. But it's old game series like the 70s or the 80s.
Yeah.
So
Actually, it was started by what's his name back in the 50s. The guy who went crazy. I can't remember.
This guy. This is the guy. Yeah. They made a movie about him.
Yeah.
The guy is named.
Whatever.
John Nash.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a big figure in that. Okay, so the conclusion I'm drawing is that we're going to have what I'm calling consequentiality. That is some sort of system that produces, or that guides us to particular encounters based on the situation. However, we want the focus of those to be the p-values. And so the p-values drive consequentiality, not the I pick up a chair and break it over, smash it over Black Bart's head, and that causes him to get so angry that he pulls out his gun. That's not the way the logic works. Instead, the logic will be, I hurt Black Bart's feelings, and he bursts into tears or whatever. It is not the actions, but the emotions. Now, this, I'll just mention one other worrisome thought, and that's Aristotle's, God, now I can't even remember the name of the book, but Aristotle wrote the definitive book, the first definitive book on drama and storytelling.
Poetics.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Poetics, yes. And in it, he made it very clear, you demonstrate stuff through actions. Characters express themselves through their actions. And yeah, that's true. But our concern is with the emotions. And so the player's actions, the primary concern when the player acts is the emotional reactions. that will be generated by that action. So, and by the way, there is another aphorism, probably the first aphorism in good writing is, don't talk about it, show it. That is, you don't say, John felt very angry about this. You say, John started huffing and puffing, and he was clenching his fists. Don't talk about it, show it. Still, the player will take actions, and the player's concerned. The internal computations are about emotional reactions, not logical consequences. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about over the next week. Any other thoughts on this general issue of logical consequentiality versus emotional consequentiality?
Maybe
the props thing that Cornell brought up was pretty interesting, having the props be a prerequisite, like the horse. I'm thinking about that, like in this bar thing, like maybe you go into the bar and until you get a beer, like it waits for you to get a beer and then it gives you the beer prop, and that could trigger the Black Bart coming in and talking to you. Like it's like you're hiding like a Boolean almost with giving the player a prop. So it seems pretty flexible. I don't know.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, trying to write my thoughts, but I can't write it. It's in like I did some theater, and one of the rules is, because we express emotions, things like that. But the thing is, the audience can't know what's in your head. So you have to show the emotions. Like, for example, you're sad, you have to show it with your body, maybe not weeping, but you have to show it and to have a sad voice. And if you're funny, you have to make the audience laugh. So everything is exaggerated because they are not in your head. Maybe in the movies, you can have a voiceover that says, you are, I feel sad, you know, it's a voiceover.
That problem is addressed by including an emotional face display. And that can always be added, but I think we can, for keeping it simple, I think we can leave that out. I think we can have the...
what we can do is make actions like Aristotle poetics. We make actions that activate emotions in the audience, in the user's mind. The emotion part is done. The work of emotion should be done by the user and not the game, because it would only be fake emotions because it's game emotions.
Yes. It is certainly better, I think, on this matter, to force the audience to use its imagination. Gee, I'll bet Black Bart is getting really angry now.
And we see it because Black Bart seems angry, and as
the vein pops out.
Yeah.
Well, that could be written into the encounter, into the encounter text. Yeah, we can deal with that.
If it's physical reaction and simpler actions, it will be, I think, easier than emotions. And you know, like let's say we don't do a psychoanalysis of the character, we do a behavioral representation of the character. So it's not what his parents are like or what are his deep emotions, but the character is sweating, or the character is mad, or the character is, you know, simpler observational emotion actions from the characters.
I feel like that's writing style and the reactions. That's where that'll come in.
Yeah, you're right. This is that's a matter of writing style.
One idea that came to my mind when that encounter text was mentioned, but this is like a advanced feature that probably you will not make it into the first version of the program, is to allow the person crafting the encounter to like modify it based on internal state of certain agents. So for example, if during previous encounters someone started to like me more, we can change the text dynamically, change the text of the encounter, and include like a few versions of a sentence or of a word that says basically something like that. If the character likes me, it can be written in the text that the character enters the room with a smile, and if that character doesn't like me, it can be an option that says the character enters the room not looking at me, or something like that.
Are you talking about something like Tinker Toy Text, where we have one encounter, but it has text variables in it?
Yes. Okay, so I get that it's already in the Tron version. Sorry, forgot the name.
I tend to be reluctant because that adds to the overall complexity, and my experience with Tinker Toy Text is it is very difficult to make Tinker Toy Text make much sense. I mean, work, unless it's plugging in very simple, straightforward text variables. But for things like, I mean, you could do it. I don't know. There's some problems with that. You start seeing the same phrase over and over again, and you start feeling like, they're like, this is too mechanical. So
no, you wouldn't see the same text. It would be more like a telltale for the player, like to hint at the internal state of certain characters. Depending on what we did before, the text could slightly change to indicate if that character is happy or likes us or dislikes us, whatever the case may be. So basically, the author would craft, for example, 2 or 4 versions of a certain sentence inserted into an encounter text, and it would just change into one of the 4 versions depending on how other characters feel about us, or how our character feels about them. And since the encounter would be only shown once, then during one playthrough,
I see that. Yeah, you're right about that. Okay, I've made a note of this.
I was thinking on this.
Go ahead.
On the same line with like, I saw some games that were doing, I think like Scott had linked a thing that was talking about inverse parsing. And it was like the examine verb on an object that's in your inventory. Like that verb examine gives you lots of text for each of the objects that you're examining. If you had the same option to like examine the person who's talking to you or something like that, it could be embedded. I don't know, that popped in my head.
Okay, well, I have a great deal to think about, so I'm going to end the class here and go for a long walk and do some thinking.
A play button? I'd love a play button in here more than anything we've talked about.
No, what do you mean by a play button?
Like a button that puts all the encounters in order, and then
okay,
I can choose the options and play it.
Yeah, just a way to get rid of all of the UI semantics of building it. a way to test it in a way that it's just window text choices that
Yeah.
gives you the feeling of going through the entire story. That
Yeah.
would be great. But of course, you got to figure out how to make it first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I have not even built the engine yet.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the engine for this is much, much simpler than the engine for the Storytron technology. Immensely simpler. So I'm not
Before
worried.
you hang up, I do want to mention one thing. I have been working on, especially in the last couple of days, or really in the last couple of months, but just recently, I've built up another version of a prototype that I've been working on a couple of months. And I didn't bring it up now because it's only tangential to the rest of the stuff that we're doing with the encounter editor. But I finally come with a place with it where I'm feeling like I'm making some really interesting progress. I have something working that's really interesting. So it has a few more bugs that I need to work out. Because what I have is right now is a little messy, and the numbers it's very different from what you're doing, Chris. But I'd like to send it to you, and I can put it up. I'm building it in Unity so that I can throw it up on an HTML website. And it has like sliders and stuff that you can play around with. And I want to try to show all of you this soon that I've been working on for the last couple of months. Because it's cool, but it's very different, I think, from what you're doing, Chris. So there might be some ideas that
George suggests you do a screen grab video.
what I want to do is actually put it on a site so that you can play the small prototype, and then I'm going to write out an explanation of how the math works.
Okay.
But even if it's not perfect now, Mark, if you did a video where you were like talking over it of like, and then this happens, and then, I mean, you could walk someone through and we could definitely give you feedback.
Sure, yeah, a video might be a good way to do it too. Yeah.
Okay, very good then. Well, I'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.